The silence in the king's study was a living thing. It had weight and texture, a quality of cold, still water that pressed in on all sides. For 5 years, Mira had learned to breathe it, to move through it without causing a ripple. Her pen was the only sound permitted, the soft, dry scratch of nib on parchment as she transcribed the royal ledgers. It was a sound Darius tolerated, the sound of his kingdom being ordered, of chaos being held at bay by her meticulous hand. The capital city of Evernight had been built on the accord, that centuries-old treaty that allowed vampires and humans to coexist in careful, codified peace. Humans provided labor, creativity, and the warm pulse of mortal life that kept the city thriving. Vampires provided protection, immortal wisdom, and the iron rule that kept the darker things at bay. It was an imperfect balance, but it was balance nonetheless, and King Darius was its guarantor. Under his rule, humans walked the streets safely, worked in positions of trust and responsibility, and were protected by laws that even the oldest vampires dared not break. Mira herself was a testament to that protection, a human entrusted with the kingdom's most sensitive documents. Living in secure housing within the citadel's inner ring, her position respected by all who served the crown. She was a tool, a function, an extension of the heavy mahogany desk she sat at, but unlike the cold furniture around her, she carried a secret warmth, a foolish hope that had somehow survived 5 years of professional distance. Almost, she risked a glance at him. He stood by the tall, arched window, a silhouette of immense stillness against the bruised twilight sky of the capital. King Darius, Lord of the Evernight, master of a court of ancient and predatory beings, looked like a statue carved from shadow and sorrow. He had not moved in over an hour. The fine wool of his black coat did not stir, the silver threads in his dark hair did not catch the gaslight. He was simply there, a constant and unnerving presence, the source of the study's profound quiet. Her heart, that traitorous and foolish organ, gave a painful thud against her ribs. It was an old ache, a familiar companion in the long, silent hours. To love a man who did not see you, or rather, who chose not to, was a special kind of torment. He acknowledged the reports she filed, the schedules she kept, the correspondence she answered in her perfect, looped script. He thanked her, occasionally, in that low, resonant voice that made her chest tighten. He even asked after her well-being when she'd been ill last winter, arranging for the court physician to attend her. But there was always a careful distance, an invisible line he never crossed. Professional, courteous, impenetrable. She, however, saw everything. She saw the tension that gathered in the hard line of his jaw when a treaty negotiation went poorly. She saw the way his long, elegant fingers would trace the rim of his wine glass, the only sign of restlessness he ever betrayed. She knew the scent of him: old books, winter air, and a faint metallic trace of something ancient and powerful that was purely Darius. She had catalogued every inflection in his low, resonant voice, from the clipped dismissal he used with sycophantic courtiers to the razor-sharp command that could bring a centuries-old general to his knees. What she didn't know was that her housing assignment in the secure Citadel quarter hadn't been random chance, or that the 2 city guards, who always seemed to be patrolling near her building, were actually elite soldiers personally selected by Lord Valerius, or that every route she walked had been quietly assessed and approved. She lived in a web of protection so subtle she had never once noticed its threads. Tonight, the silence felt different. It was sharper, colder. A delegation from the southern clans had left an hour ago, their footsteps echoing with a hostile retreat. Mira had transcribed the meeting's minutes, her fingers flying to capture the veiled threats, the brittle diplomacy. Now, the aftermath hung in the air, a tension so thick she could taste it on her tongue. "The ledgers are complete for the day, my lord," she said, her voice steady and professional. Darius did not turn, but his voice came, low and controlled. "Thank you, Mira. Your accuracy is, as always, invaluable." It was more than he usually said. She felt the small, painful flutter of hope she'd learned to suppress. "Is there anything else you need before I go?" A pause, a fraction too long. Then, "No, that will be all." She swallowed the familiar sting of disappointment and began to tidy her workspace. She capped the inkwell, blotted the final page, and stacked the heavy books with practiced efficiency. As she rose, her worn leather satchel in hand, she caught his reflection in the window glass. He was watching her. The moment their eyes met in the reflection, he looked away, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. It was a small thing, a tiny crack in his armor, but Mira had learned to survive on crumbs. "Good night, my lord," she said softly. "Good night, Mira. Safe travels home." It was a dismissal, gentle but firm. With a final, lingering look at his profile, Mira slipped from the room, pulling the heavy oak door closed until it clicked softly shut. The corridor beyond was warmer than the study, lit by gas lamps that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Her apartment was close, just 3 floors down in the residential wing reserved for senior staff. The walk took mere minutes, and she was grateful for it tonight. The tension from the meeting had left her drained. What she didn't see was Darius, still standing at the window, his hand pressed flat against the glass as he watched her small figure cross the courtyard below, waiting until she disappeared safely into the residential building, before he finally allowed himself to breathe. What he didn't see was the figure watching from the shadows of the outer gate. A figure who had been watching for weeks, cataloging patterns, noting routines. A figure who had finally seen what he'd been looking for. The way the king's gaze followed his secretary. The fraction of a second pause before he looked away. The almost imperceptible softening in his expression when she spoke. It was nothing. It was everything. And Stefan, who had spent 5 years searching for the woman who had fled from him, who had tracked her to this cursed city and spent months probing its defenses, finally had his leverage. But patience was required. The king's security was legendary, the protection around the citadel absolute. Stefan needed an opening, a moment of vulnerability, so he watched, and waited, and planned. 3 weeks later, that moment came. Mira was reviewing a procurement contract in her apartment when the knock came. It was late past midnight, but not unheard of. Sometimes urgent documents needed the king's attention before dawn meetings. "Miss Mira?" a voice called through the door. "Courier from the southern provinces. Time-sensitive documents for the king's review." She opened the door to a young man in courier livery, holding a sealed dispatch case. He looked nervous, sweating despite the cool night. "I was told to deliver these directly to you for vetting before they reach His Majesty. It was standard protocol." She reached for the case. The moment her fingers touched the leather, everything went wrong. The courier's hand shot out with inhuman speed, clamping over her mouth. His eyes bled to black, his face contorting with predatory hunger. "Hello, little bird," Stefan whispered, his true voice replacing the glamour. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" Panic exploded through her. She tried to scream, to fight. But a second figure materialized from the shadows of the corridor, the night guard who was supposed to be protecting this wing. His throat already torn open, his body crumpling silently to the floor. This was planned, coordinated. They'd breached the citadel itself. "Your precious king has been distracted tonight," Stefan hissed, pressing a cloth over her face. The chemical smell was overwhelming. A convenient riot in the eastern quarter. All his best people deployed. He's grown so confident in his little fortress, so arrogant. But you he values. I've seen it in how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices. Let's see if he values you enough to bleed for. Her struggles weakened, consciousness slipping away like water through her fingers. Her last thought was a desperate, silent cry. "Darius." "I'm sorry." In the king's private chambers, Darius was reviewing intelligence reports on the Eastern Quarter riot when Lord Valerius burst through the door without announcement, a breach of protocol so severe it made Darius's head snap up instantly. "Mira," Valerius said, his ancient face ashen. "She's gone. Guards dead. Taken from inside the citadel." The report slipped from Darius's fingers, pages scattering like fallen leaves. For one crystalline moment, the world stopped. Then it shattered. The sound that tore from Darius's throat was not human, not even vampire. It was something older, something primal that made Valerius take an involuntary step back despite 9 centuries of fearlessness. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost spreading across the windows in intricate, violent patterns. Who? It was not a question. It was an execution order. "We don't know yet, but find them." Each word was a thunderclap. Darius was moving, shadows pooling around him like living things. "Mobilize every resource. Tear this city apart stone by stone if you must. I want every vampire, every human, every cursed rat in the sewers questioned. Now." Valerius had never seen the king like this. In 900 years, he'd witnessed Darius face betrayals, wars, even the death of his sire with cold, calculated composure. This was different. This was personal. This was a dam breaking. My lord, we should act if. Did I stutter? Darius turned, and Valerius found himself looking into eyes of burning crimson, power radiating from the king in waves that made the air itself tremble. She is inside my citadel, under my protection, in my care, and they took her, from me. The emphasis on that last word carried the weight of centuries. Valerius understood then what he had long suspected but never confirmed. The king's careful distance, his meticulous professionalism with his secretary, it hadn't been indifference. It had been restraint, a restraint that was now gone. I'll have answers within the hour, Valerius promised. You have 30 minutes. They found the first lead in 23 minutes. A rogue vampire in the lower districts, drunk on stolen blood and bragging about the big score his friend Stefan had planned. He mentioned a name, the widow's warehouse by the polluted river, an abandoned building that had been purchased through a shell company 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Stefan had been planning this for 6 weeks. Darius didn't wait for reinforcements. He didn't form a strategy. He simply vanished from the citadel, moving through the city like a cold wind, like death itself given purpose and direction. What followed would be spoken of in whispers for generations. The widow's warehouse was a hulking structure of rotting wood and rusted iron, its windows broken eyes staring out at the fetid river. Darius approached it from the shadows, his senses extending outward. 12 vampires inside, no 13, and one human. One fragile, precious human heartbeat, fast and frightened but steady. Alive. The control he had maintained for centuries didn't crack. It simply ceased to exist. He went through the wall, not the door, the actual brick wall, the explosion of masonry and dust, announcing his arrival like the opening salvo of war. The vampires inside had barely enough time to register his presence before he was among them. But this was not the wild, berserk rampage his court would later hear rumors of. This was worse. This was precise. This was art. The first vampire lunged, and Darius simply redirected his momentum, sending him crashing through a support beam with enough force that the entire building shuddered. The second drew a blade, and Darius took it from him along with the hand holding it in a movement too fast to see. The third tried to flee, and found his legs no longer obeyed him, severed tendons dropping him to the floor where he could only watch the carnage unfold. Darius was a surgeon, and these were his patients. Each cut was deliberate, each break purposeful. He was not killing them quickly, he was dismantling them, leaving them alive and conscious to witness what happened when you threatened what belonged to the King of Evernight. In the center of the room, chained to a heavy chair, Mira watched with wide, terrified eyes. Not terrified of Darius, terrified for him. Because she'd never seen him move like this, fight like this. And there was a cold, terrible beauty to it that was more frightening than any wild rage could be. Stefan was backing away, his earlier bravado crumbling into ash. He had a knife pressed to Mira's throat, his hand shaking.
Oh.
Stay back or she dies. Darius stopped. He stood 15 feet away, perfectly still, his crimson eyes locked on Stefan. He was covered in blood that wasn't his own, his expensive black suit torn and ruined. Behind him, 11 vampires lay broken, some still twitching, all still conscious and suffering. The only sounds were their whimpers, and the steady drip of blood from the rafters. You made a miscalculation, Darius said, his voice conversational, almost pleasant. It was the most terrifying sound Stefan had ever heard. You thought my feelings for her were a weakness, a vulnerability you could exploit. I know they are. Stefan spat, pressing the knife harder. A thin line of blood appeared on Mira's throat. You're too late, Your Majesty. The moment you move, she. Darius raised his hand, palm out. The chains binding Mira, thick iron forged to hold lesser vampires, began to tremble. Then, twist. Then, with a series of sharp, metallic shrieks, they shattered. Stefan's eyes went wide with disbelief. That's impossible. In that fraction of a second, Darius moved. He didn't cross the distance, he simply was there. One hand gently guiding Mira forward and away, the other closing around Stefan's throat. The knife clattered uselessly to the floor. You're right that my feelings for her are a vulnerability, Darius whispered, lifting Stefan off his feet with effortless strength. But you misunderstand the nature of that vulnerability. It's not a weakness that makes me fragile. It's a constraint that makes me civilized. And you, Stefan, just removed that constraint. Darius's hand tightened, and Stefan's scream echoed through the warehouse for exactly 3 seconds before it was cut short with a wet final crack. The silence that followed was absolute. Darius let the body drop and turned to Mira. She stood where he'd positioned her, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes too wide, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. There was blood on her yellow cardigan, not hers, but from the carnage around them. She was shaking. He approached her slowly, his hands raised and open, palms out. "Mira," he said softly, his voice stripped of all command, all authority. Just her name, gentle as a prayer. "I'm going to take you home now. Is that all right?" She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She didn't seem capable of speech. "I need to carry you. The building is unstable. May I touch you?" Another nod. He moved with infinite care, scooping her into his arms as though she were made of spun glass. She curled instinctively against his chest, her face pressing into his shoulder, and he felt her begin to cry great, silent, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. "I have you," he whispered against her hair. "I have you, and I will never let go again. I swear it on my crown, on my kingdom, on my very existence. Never again." He carried her out of that place of death and into the night, leaving the broken bodies behind as a message to anyone who might consider targeting what was his. The first hint Lord Valerius had that something had gone catastrophically wrong was when the king returned to the citadel just before dawn, carrying his unconscious secretary in his arms, both of them covered in blood. Darius walked past the assembled guards, past the gasping courtiers, his expression utterly blank. He took her directly to the royal physician's chambers, and did not emerge for 3 hours. When he finally did, his first words were, "Prepare the sunroom in the East Tower, full medical staff. I want healers rotating every 4 hours. No one enters without my explicit permission." "My lord," Valerius said carefully, "what happened at the warehouse?" "I left 13 vampires alive," Darius replied flatly. "Paralyzed, broken, but alive and conscious. They can explain to whoever finds them what happens when my protection is breached. Have them displayed in the public square for 3 days, then execute them. And Stefan is no longer a concern." The second hint came when the king cancelled all audiences, postponed all state matters, and took up residence in the corridor outside the sunroom. Not inside. Outside. For 5 days, he sat in a chair against the wall, reading reports brought to him by Valerius, signing documents on a makeshift desk, and waiting for the woman inside to wake. The physical healing was swift. Vampire blood, carefully administered by the healers, closed wounds and mended bruises with preternatural speed. By the 3rd day, there wasn't a mark on her. But when Mira finally opened her eyes on the 6th day, they were empty. She stared at the ceiling. She ate what the healers brought her. She allowed them to bathe and dress her. But she didn't speak, didn't react, didn't seem to recognize where she was or who she was. The trauma had driven her somewhere deep inside herself, somewhere safe and dark and unreachable. Darius tried to enter once. The moment he crossed the threshold, her breathing accelerated, her eyes going wide with animal panic. She didn't scream, she'd gone beyond screaming, but the healers gently ushered him out, their faces sympathetic but firm. "She associates you with the violence, Your Majesty," the head physician explained. "Not just Stefan's, but yours as well. She watched you kill 13 vampires. For a human, for someone not raised in our world's brutality, it's too much. She needs time. Time." He had nothing but time. He was immortal. But every moment she spent trapped in that silent darkness felt like an eternity in hell. So he waited. And while he waited, he built her a world. He had the sunroom filled with things she loved, books, hundreds of them, in every genre he'd ever seen her reading. A painting of the sea, commissioned from the kingdom's finest artist, so detailed and alive that one could almost hear the waves. Soft blankets in cheerful colors. A small writing desk by the window, stocked with the finest paper and her favorite simple pens. Winter roses in crystal vases, their scent gentle and sweet. He didn't enter. He left these gifts like offerings at a shrine, hoping they might call her back from wherever she'd gone. Days became weeks. The court watched their king's transformation with a mixture of awe and unease. The terrifying remote sovereign had become a man haunted, a ghost haunting his own castle. He fulfilled his duties with mechanical precision, but everyone could see that his mind, his heart, his entire being was focused on that closed door in the East Tower. "He's obsessed," Lady Seraphina whispered to her companions at court. "It's dangerous. Unseemly. It's devotion," Valerius corrected quietly. "And it's the most human thing I've seen him do in 9 centuries. On the 23rd day, Darius was sitting in his usual place, reading a trade agreement he didn't care about, when he heard it, a sound from inside the room. Not the healers, not the attendants, her. She was humming. Just a few notes. Barely audible. But it was the first voluntary sound she'd made since the warehouse. His hands trembled so badly he had to set down the document. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs, forcing himself to remain still. To not burst through that door. To not frighten her back into silence. The humming continued for a few minutes, then stopped. He heard footsteps, her footsteps, light and uncertain. Then, after a long pause, the door opened. Mira stood in the doorway, wrapped in a soft blue dressing gown. She looked thin, fragile, but her eyes were clear. They were focused. And they were looking at him. "You're still here," she said. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, barely a whisper. Darius rose slowly from his chair, his movements careful and deliberate. "I haven't left. Why?" The question held genuine confusion, as if the answer weren't obvious. As if the fact that he'd torn apart 13 vampires with his bare hands hadn't made his feelings abundantly clear. "Because you are here," he said simply. "And wherever you are is where I need to be." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped back, leaving the door open. An invitation. A beginning. He didn't enter immediately. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to frighten you. I'm frightened of everything right now," she said quietly. "But I think I'd like to try. With you." He entered like a supplicant entering a holy place, his eyes never leaving hers, ready to retreat at the first sign of distress. She moved to the window seat, settling among the cushions, and gestured to the chair opposite. Not beside her. Opposite. Distance, but not separation. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I remember everything, every detail, every sound." Her voice was steady, but her hands were twisting in her lap. "I remember Stefan taking me. I remember the warehouse. I remember watching you. Kill them," he finished when she couldn't. "Yes. You were so controlled," she whispered. "That's what terrified me. Not that you were violent, but that you were calm. Like it was easy. Natural." Darius felt each word like a blade. "It was," he admitted, "because the alternative was losing you. And that was unthinkable." "Why?" She looked at him directly now, her eyes searching his face. "For 5 years you barely acknowledged me. You were professional, courteous, but distant. Why does it matter so much that I was taken?" This was it, the moment of truth he'd been dreading and hoping for. He could hide behind more careful distance, more professional explanations, or he could give her honesty, raw and unfiltered, and let her decide. "Because the first day you walked into my study," he began, his voice low and rough with emotion, "you smiled at me. Not the careful, measured smile people use with kings. A real smile, warm and genuine, as if I were simply a man you were pleased to meet. And something inside me that had been frozen for centuries began to thaw." He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "It terrified me, Mira. I am a creature of control, of order. My entire existence is built on discipline and distance. Feeling anything that intense, that consuming. It was a security breach. A vulnerability I couldn't afford. So you pushed me away." "No," he said firmly. "I maintained professional boundaries. I ensured you were protected, assigned guards you never saw, housing you didn't realize was reserved for the most valued members of my court. I made certain you were safe, compensated well, treated with respect. But I couldn't let myself get close. Because I knew if I did, if I let that wall crack even slightly, I wouldn't be able to stop. I would want all of you, every smile, every word, every moment, and wanting something that much gives the entire world leverage against you. Stefan found that leverage anyway, yes, because I was a fool who thought distance was the same as protection. I thought if I didn't acknowledge my feelings, if I didn't act on them, you would be invisible to my enemies. Instead, I just made you lonely. Mira's eyes filled with tears. I thought there was something wrong with me. That I wasn't good enough, smart enough, interesting enough. Every day I tried so hard to do perfect work, to maybe earn a kind word or a real conversation, and every day you looked through me like I was glass. The anguish in Darius's expression was profound. There was never anything wrong with you. You were perfect. You are perfect. That was the problem. You were so perfectly yourself, kind, bright, unafraid, that you made me want to be something other than what I am. You made me want to be someone capable of loving you the way you deserved. And what way is that? Openly, completely, without restraint or fear. He paused, then added quietly, without violence. She was silent for a long moment, processing. But you are violent, that's part of what you are. Yes, he agreed. I am ancient, and powerful, and when necessary, brutal. I have killed thousands in my long life, Mira. I am a predator. A monster wearing a crown. You saved me. I destroyed 13 people in front of you. I gave you nightmares. No, she said firmly, surprising him. Stefan gave me nightmares. You ended them. There's a difference. He stared at her, hardly daring to hope. You're not afraid of me? I'm afraid of what you're capable of, she admitted. But I'm not afraid of you. When you found me in that warehouse, when you asked permission to touch me before you carried me out, that's when I knew. You're not a monster. You're a man with monstrous power, and you choose every day how to use it. That night, you chose to use it for me. I would choose you every time, he said, his voice breaking. Over my crown, over my kingdom, over my very existence. You are the first thing I think of when I wake, and the last thought before I rest. You are the reason I want to be better than what I am. You are everything, Mira, and I am so sorry I made you doubt that. She stood, moving to the window, her back to him. He remained seated, giving her space, his entire body tense with the effort of not going to her. I need you to understand something, she said to the glass. I'm not the same person I was before. I'm broken in ways I don't fully understand yet. I have nightmares. I panic at unexpected sounds. I can't bear to be in dark spaces. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal. Then I will be broken with you, Darius said quietly. I will sit with you through every nightmare. I will keep the lights burning. I will learn what you need, and spend eternity providing it. You don't have to be whole to be loved, Mira. You just have to be you. She turned back to him, tears streaming down her face. Why couldn't you have just told me this 5 years ago? Because I was a coward, he said simply. I was an ancient, immortal coward who was more afraid of feeling something real than of facing armies. You deserved better than my silence. You deserved poetry and courtship, and a man brave enough to love you properly. Instead, you got a king who hid behind protocol and nearly lost you because of it, Darius. I can't undo those 5 years, he continued. I can't erase the pain I caused you, or the trauma you endured because of my failures. But I can offer you the rest of my existence. However long you'll have me. In whatever capacity you'll allow. If you want me as a friend, I will be the best friend you've ever had. If you want me at a distance, I will admire you from afar, and ensure you want for nothing. And if you want... He stopped, his voice failing. If I want? She prompted softly. If you want me as I am, monster and man, violence and devotion, every broken, ancient piece of me, then I am yours. Completely, eternally. Yours. The silence stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Mira wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then did something that made his dead heart lurch. She smiled. It was small, sad, and tremulous, but it was real. I don't know if I can love you yet, she said honestly. I don't know if I'm capable of loving anyone right now, but I think. She took a shaky breath. I think I'd like to try. To see if there's something worth building between us, something real. This time. No more silence, no more distance. Darius stood slowly, hope and terror warring in his expression. We'll go at whatever pace you need. No expectations. No pressure. Just presence. Presence, she repeated, testing the word. I think I can work with that. He wanted to cross the room, to take her in his arms, to kiss her and promise her the world. But he held himself perfectly still, letting her control every aspect of their interaction. She was the one who closed the distance, walking to him with careful steps. She stood before him, tilting her head back to look into his eyes, no longer crimson, but their normal deep wine color. Thank you, she said quietly, for not giving up on me. For waiting. I would have waited centuries, he replied. Though I'm grateful I didn't have to. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his hand. He held perfectly still, barely breathing, letting her explore at her own pace. She traced the long lines of his fingers, the cool marble of his skin, then slowly, carefully, she laced her fingers through his. One step at a time? She asked. One step at a time, he agreed. And standing there in the sunlit room, hands joined, two broken beings began the long, careful work of healing together. The healing was not linear. There were good days and terrible days. Days when Mira could laugh at Valerius's dry wit over breakfast, and days when she couldn't leave her bed. Days when she could sit with Darius in companionable silence, and days when his mere presence sent her into spiraling panic. But through it all, Darius kept his promise. He was present. He learned the geography of her trauma with the dedication of a scholar. Cheap wine was banished from the city. Unexpected touch was carefully negotiated in advance. She developed a signal, a hand on her chest that meant she needed space, and he would immediately retreat without question or offense. His entire life, an existence that had spanned centuries and continents, narrowed to the single purpose of her well-being. The court adjusted to their king's new reality. State dinners were held earlier, so he could return in time to read to her before she slept. She'd admitted that his voice helped quiet the nightmares. Trade negotiations were scheduled around her therapy sessions with the elven mind healer. The kingdom ran efficiently under Valerius's capable hands, but everyone knew where the king's heart resided. 3 months after the warehouse, they had their first real test. Lord Vorlag of the Onyx Peaks arrived at court with a retinue of grim-faced soldiers, ostensibly to discuss mining rights, but his true purpose radiated from him like a foul miasma. Word of the king's weakness had spread through the vampire world. An ancient king, undone by affection for a mortal. Some saw it as romantic. Others, like Vorlag, saw it as opportunity. Mira was walking in the inner gardens, a book in her hand, when Vorlag and 2 of his guards intercepted her. She recognized the look in his eyes, immediately the same predatory assessment Stefan had given her. The same cruel dismissal. Her heart began to race, but alongside the fear was something new. Anger. The famous Miss Mira, Vorlag said, his voice a silken purr. He was tall and handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, with eyes as black and empty as polished stone. I confess, I do not see what inspires such dramatic displays of devotion. Mira's fingers tightened on her book. She had 2 choices, run and hide, or stand her ground. The old Mira would have fled, but the old Mira had died in that warehouse, and the woman who had emerged was forged from something harder. Lord Vorlag, she said, her voice steady. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though from your tone, I gather you consider yourself above such courtesies. His eyes narrowed. Careful, little human. You stand here only by the king's sufferance. No, she corrected coolly. I stand here as a citizen of Evernight, protected by the Accord, and employed in a position of trust by the crown. You, however, stand here as a guest. And guests who insult their host's household are generally asked to leave. Vorlag's expression darkened. He stepped closer, invading her space in a calculated show of dominance. His guards moved to flank her, creating a cage of menace. Perhaps the king's protection has made you bold, but protection can be withdrawn. Mira felt the fear spike. The old, terrible fear from the warehouse. But she pushed through it. She had learned something important in the past 3 months. Fear didn't have to paralyze. It could fuel. You're right that the king's protection makes me bold, she said, her voice clear and carrying. But you've made an error in your calculations, Lord Vorlag. You assume his protection is a shield I hide behind. It's not. It's a standard I live up to. He values me because I am competent, intelligent, and loyal. Not because I'm fragile. Not because I need rescuing. But because I am worthy of respect. She took a deliberate step forward, forcing him to either step back or stand his ground at an uncomfortably close distance. He held, his jaw tightening. So, here's what's going to happen, Mira continued. You're going to step aside and allow me to continue my walk. Then you're going to attend your meeting with the king and conduct yourself with the dignity befitting a lord of your station. And if you ever approach me again with veiled threats, I will file a formal complaint under Section 7 of the Accord, which grants humans the right to protection from intimidation by vampire nobility. That complaint will require a tribunal, and I suspect the king would be very interested in attending. It was a bluff. She had no idea if Section 7 even existed, but she delivered it with absolute confidence. The same confidence she'd learned from watching Darius navigate court politics for 5 years. Vorlag stared at her, clearly reassessing. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. It wasn't a kind sound, but there was a grudging respect in it. Perhaps I do see the appeal. You have fangs, little human. Even without the teeth. He stepped aside with a mocking bow. Until we meet again, Miss Mira. As he walked away, Mira felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. She sat heavily on the nearest bench, her hands shaking, adrenaline crashing through her system. She had done it. She had faced a threat and hadn't frozen. Hadn't needed rescue. That, said a quiet voice from the hedge maze entrance, was the most magnificent thing I've ever witnessed. Mira looked up to find Darius standing there, half hidden in shadow. He looked like he'd been running. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his coat askew. He must have felt her fear through whatever mysterious awareness he seemed to have and had come running. How much did you see? She asked. All of it. He moved toward her slowly, as always telegraphing his approach. Valerius sent word that Vorlag was in the gardens. I came immediately. But you. His voice was thick with emotion. You handled it yourself. You were incredible. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action despite it. He sat beside her on the bench, careful to leave space between them. I was prepared to intervene, but you didn't need me to. I needed you there, she corrected. I needed to know you would come if I called. But I also needed to prove to myself that I could handle it. That Stefan didn't break me completely. He didn't break you at all, Darius said firmly. He wounded you, but you're healing. And you're stronger than you know. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Mira said, I made up Section 7 of the Accord. I have no idea if it exists. Darius's face broke into a rare, genuine smile. It doesn't, but it does now. I'll have Valerius draft it this afternoon. She laughed, the sound bright and surprised, and his smile widened. He loved that sound. He would rearrange reality itself to hear it more often. Vorlag won't try that again, Darius added, his voice hardening. But if he does, then I'll handle it, Mira interrupted. And if I can't, then I'll call for you. Partnership, remember? I don't need you to fight all my battles. Just to be there when I need you. Always, he promised. She looked at him then, really looked at him. In the dappled sunlight of the garden, he looked less like a monster and more like a man. A complicated, ancient, devoted man who had spent 3 months learning the topography of her trauma and adjusting his entire existence to help her heal. I think, she said slowly, I might be ready. Ready for what? To try, actually try. Not just healing, but us. His breath caught. Are you certain? There's no rush, Mira. We have time. I know. But I also know that I've spent 3 months watching you be patient and kind and protective, without ever asking for anything in return. And I know that every time you smile, really smile, it makes something in my chest feel warm. And I know that I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. So yes, I'm ready to try. He reached out slowly, his hand hovering near her face, a question. She nodded, and he cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. Then we'll try together. At whatever pace you set, and if you change your mind, if you need to step back, that's all right too. What if I'm never completely okay? She asked quietly. What if I'm always a little broken? Then you'll be my favorite broken thing, he said simply. I've seen perfect, Mira. I've lived for centuries, surrounded by flawless immortals. They're boring. You, with your scars and your courage and your ridiculous ability to invent legal precedent on the spot, you're extraordinary. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. Tell me again, why you love me. Because you smile like sunrise, he said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Because you brought color into a world of shadow. Because you saw a cold, distant king and decided he deserved chamomile tea and fresh roses anyway. Because you survived the unsurvivable and came back stronger. Because every day with you is a reminder that my long existence might actually mean something. Because you're you, and there's no one I'd rather spend eternity knowing. She opened her eyes and they were bright with tears. I don't know if I love you yet. But I think I'm close. Then I'll wait, he said. I'm very good at waiting. She kissed him then, gentle and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. He responded with reverent care, his hand cradling her face as if she were made of starlight and wishes. It was not a kiss of passion but of promise, of beginnings, of hope. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his, breathing in his scent of winter and old books. One step at a time, she whispered. One step at a time, he agreed. And sitting there in the garden, surrounded by roses and sunlight, they began to build something neither had thought possible. A love that was not perfect, but was real. Not painless, but worth the pain. Not a fairy tale, but infinitely better it was theirs. Epilogue 90. 6 months later. The court had adapted to their king's new reality with surprising grace. Mira no longer served as his secretary, that role had been given to another, more suitable for the position. Instead, she served as the Director of Human Affairs, a newly created position that gave her voice and authority in matters affecting the human population under the Accord. She was good at it. Unsurprisingly, she had always understood both worlds. She and Darius still took their time. Some nights, she slept in her own chambers. Some nights, in his, curled against his side as he read aloud until she drifted off. Their relationship was a careful dance. Always negotiated. Always moving at her pace. The nightmares came less frequently now. And when they did, he was there. Solid and real. Anchoring her back to the present. They fought occasionally about policy, about protocol, about his tendency to hover when she didn't need protection. But they always talked it through. Always found compromise. She had made him promise, early on, to treat her as an equal, not a fragile thing to be protected. He tried. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he failed spectacularly. But he always tried. On this particular evening, they were in the study, the same study where it had all begun. Mira was reviewing a proposal at her old desk, now converted into her workspace. Darius was at his, reading correspondence. The silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the scratch of pens and the occasional rustle of paper. Darius? She said eventually. Do you remember the first day I came to work for you? He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. Every detail. What did you think of me? He considered, then answered honestly. I thought you were a security risk. I thought your smile was dangerous. I thought I should request a different secretary immediately. He paused. I thought I was doomed. She laughed softly. And were you? Completely. Irrevocably. Gloriously doomed. He rose from his desk and moved to hers, perching on the edge. Why do you ask? Because I was thinking about that day, how nervous I was, how desperately I wanted to do a good job. How I promised myself I wouldn't develop feelings for my impossibly handsome, impossibly remote employer. She looked up at him, her eyes warm. I broke that promise within a week. Only a week? I lasted 3 days. Liar. You're just saying that to make me feel better. I'm absolutely not, he said seriously. 3 days. There was a moment you were explaining a filing system you'd developed, completely absorbed in your work, and you tucked your hair behind your ear without thinking. And I remember having this crystalline thought, I am in significant trouble. I was correct. She stood, moving into the circle of his arms. He wrapped them around her automatically now, no longer needing explicit permission for every touch. They had learned each other's boundaries, each other's needs. I love you, she said. Simple, direct, true. She felt him go very still. I love you, Darius. I think I have for a long time, but I'm saying it now. I love you. I love you. He buried his face in her hair, his arms tightening almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, you dramatic, ancient, ridiculous vampire. He pulled back just enough to kiss her, and this time there was passion controlled, careful, but undeniably present. I love you, he said against her lips. I have loved you for 5 years, 4 months, and 17 days. I will love you for every day I continue to exist. You are my heart, Mira. You always have been. Even when you were pretending I was furniture? Especially then, the furniture was very insistent on putting roses on my desk. She laughed, the sound joyful and free, and he captured it with another kiss. Outside the study windows, the city of Evernight stretched out beneath them, vampire and human living in careful balance. Inside, a king and his beloved stood wrapped in each other's arms, two broken things that had somehow made each other whole. It was not a perfect ending. There would still be nightmares, still be challenges, still be moments of doubt and fear. But they would face them together, one step at a time, building a love that was messy and complicated and absolutely real. And in the end, that was worth more than any fairy tale. The end.